think it's really important because I think it's a really strong statement that NATO is now finally taking seriously the defence of Greenland. I mean, that's what lies behind at least part of what President Trump has been talking about in Greenland, that this really important island, which is a kind of strategic bulwark against Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic, has been very largely left undefended. Of course, there have been American troops there, but Denmark, which is the owner of the foreign policy of Greenland, and the Greenlanders themselves have not necessarily taken that defence as seriously. So the idea of having some dogfights over it, NATO aircraft based there permanently, is a very strong and positive statement. Well, hopefully, he will then recognise that in terms of the security needs of America, that NATO has finally woken up to them and will actually will meet the requirements that he's got. And that might hopefully then turn him away from attempting to annex Greenland completely for himself, which I think will just end up splitting the alliance and not necessarily making NATO a stronger place as a result. The threat of a NATO country annexing another NATO country is a very real one. I mean, it's an old saying, it goes right the way back to the 1950s, but the role of NATO was to keep Russia out, the Americans in and the Germans down. Well, we can ignore the Germans down bit now for the time being, but it was never envisaged in terms of the construction of NATO, in terms of the structure of everything all about it, that there would ever be a situation where another NATO country chose to annex another part of another country. So President Tusk is absolutely correct that if Trump continues along the path that he's indicated that he might consider, which is formally annexing Greenland, that would drive us a coach and horses through the coherence of the NATO itself and effectively divide America away from it. And that's dangerous because while I don't in any way agree with the way in which European countries have, in many cases, failed to support their defence interests over the many years, we can't have a situation where America, the predominant military power in the world, but also in NATO, then helps itself to other parts of NATO. It has got legitimate security interests, but those can be met by NATO working together and cooperating together, and not by annexing, because we in Europe would then suffer most as a result of it. I think in the short term, what we're going to see is what we're going to see. We're seeing troops arriving over there. We're seeing ships deploying, and we're going to see aircraft arriving and deploying and exercising in that area. The issue then will be, what does a more permanent presence look like in terms of what we're doing? Already there's a conversation and a designation calling it NATO Arctic Sentry. In other words, deploying a force there permanently, which acts as a kind of tripwire and defence against any Russian or Chinese influence and interest in that area. And that would be rather like the equivalent, which is Baltic Sentry, which actually, as I said, it acts as kind of tripwire to bring in other NATO forces from the future. So I think we're going to see that. We can also expect, and we're aware of this, an increasing number of specialist aircraft and specialist ships be available to the NATO in the Arctic area, particularly icebreakers, and the ability of them to operate around the clock. At the moment, Russia and China has a distinct advantage in that particular area. But I would expect to see over time now, we're already aware of a program called ICE, which is a program run from America, Canada, and Finland to increase the number of icebreakers, and other countries may also join in with that. Putin's statement is basically designed to drive a wedge or a further wedge between America and its European allies by making a statement saying it has no interest or designs on that, when clearly President Trump does. That divides the country. It's also fairly spurious. He talks about the fact there have been no Russian submarines being spotted in and around the Arctic recently. They don't have to have submarines there in order to demonstrate their interest in the area. They've still got large claims over quite a lot of part of the Arctic, and they've been fairly aggressively, and the Chinese have been doing this in the Bering Straits area as well, been fairly aggressively employing their icebreakers very close to territorial limits. And showing that they've got an interest in that area. Now, Putin's loving this because basically he sees a way to divide Europe from America and split NATO. So he can throw this statement saying that he recognises that Greenland is part of Denmark in there, and all that really does is stir the pot, which of course is exactly what he wants to try and do. Some of Putin's statements appear to suggest that in the event of that hopefully most unlikely clash between America and Denmark over there, that he would support the Danes. I don't think it would ever revolve around hopefully any kind of military operation in support of them. He has talked about not wanting the Arctic to be militarized, but at the moment that's only contradicted by the way in which the Russians themselves have been building up their bases along on the Arctic and across that whole area. So I think he's just at the moment in a game of stirring things up. I cannot envisage a situation whereby, in the hopefully, I hope unlikely event of American and Danish soldiers having to fight each other, that Putin would come in on the side of Denmark. I don't think that's a realistic prospect. I think that there is an element of hyperbole with President Trump. I mean, he's right to say that there is a NATO and particularly an American strategic interest in ensuring that Denmark is defensible, not least of which because of where the Americans have had to try and counter potential Russian ballistic missile threats from the Kola Peninsula, which is alongside Norway from there. But his talk about the place being kind of rotten with Russian and Chinese vessels is an exaggeration. We're used to President Trump exaggerating, sometimes for effect, sometimes it just seems over the top. But also, I think it's an indication of his mood and his interest in what he's trying to do. So my take on this is that there is a definite interest in securing Greenland. That's been neglected. I think that's also correct. But there are means and mechanisms whereby Greenland's security, which is also North America's security, and therefore the United States of America's security, can be enhanced, and it's entirely within the direct agreement, which is not even a NATO agreement, between Denmark and America over defences there. So he does not need, for security reasons, to actually take over Greenland. He can achieve all his objectives by negotiation, and I hope that's what he's going to do. What this whole conversation has shown is the strategic importance of Greenland. And the Arctic is also an area of great interest to many countries in the world. With climate change, the ice, particularly the summer ice, appears to be receding, which means that the Northwest Passage and the Northeast Passage, which were long sought by explorers going over centuries, now appear to be genuinely open almost all the year round. And we know that Russia particularly has spent a lot of money on developing a fleet of some 47 icebreakers, including nuclear-powered icebreakers, who can keep going all year round in order to keep those sea routes open. So strategically, it's of enormous importance to all countries in the world. So it does sense that this could be another strategic battleground, and one perhaps in the past that we have ignored. But the effects of climate change and the opening up of trade and also mineral exploitation that might come from that means that this area now is strategically very important to many countries.